Hello! This video will demonstrate how to enter variables into SPSS and briefly introduce what the SPSS is. So when you launch SPSS, this is the version 21, but it's pretty much the same for all other versions. It doesn't change that much from year to year. I mean, if you're working with the version 13, there can be some differences that are quite remarkable. If you work with the version 19, 20, they're pretty much the same as the version 21. So SPSS view is very similar to the Excel. The only thing that it has is that it has a data view window and a variable view window. And those windows have different purposes. In a data view window, as the name suggests, you enter all your data and you store your data. In variable view window, you enter the names of your variables and you have pretty much the list of all the variables in your data set. They can be 1,000 variables, depending on the research you have, or it can be 3. So what we have in here is in SPSS you'll have a file options where you can save the data set, open a new data set, you can open already existing data set, the rest of them I hardly ever use any of them. Edit, you can insert variables or insert cases, that's pretty much the most often ones you'll use. View bar, never really used it. Data, transform and analyze are probably the main 3 options you will use in SPSS, and the 4th most useful option would be graphs if you want to have a graphical representation of your data. So what do we have in our data view? The columns in this spreadsheet represent variables. So how many variables you have, that's how many columns you will have. The rows in this data set represent the number of subjects or number of participants. So if you have 10 participants, you will use 10 rows. If you had 20 participants, you'll use 20 rows. So columns, always a variable, rows, always a participant. So let's have a look at the example of how we can enter the data set. So let's make this window slightly not this one, slightly smaller. And we have an example of a very general exercise that used in psychology for teaching people how to run different statistical tests and work with SPSS. Can we make it smaller? There we go. So what we have in here is that 10 participants took part in an experiment and their scores on traditional examination and open book examination were recorded. So basically one participant first participated in traditional examination and then in open book examination, and for the experimental designs the conditions were possibly counterbalanced, or they should be counterbalanced in order to eliminate order effect. But this is the data set we have for 10 participants, and for each single participant we have scores for the traditional exam and score for open book exam, which suggests that it's a within participants design. So examination type is within participants variable. However, we also have a gender variable that we can use for our analysis or not, and the gender variable, because participant can only be either male or a female, they cannot change their gender depending on the requirement of experiment, we know that this is a between participant variables. So pretty much most of the variables you'll ever work with will be either within participants or between participants. So how do we enter the variables in the data set? How we would enter this particular data in SPSS. So let's go to the variable view, and in here we can assign variables. So our first variable is the participant number, so we can name it participant. And make sure you have no spaces, no funny numbers. Sorry, numbers are fine, not funny signs in there, because SPSS would not like it. It will say there is an error in a variable and it will not record it. So we recorded our variable participant, and in here we can basically what we have is the type, what type of a variable it is, and by default it would say numeric, and that's what we're happy with. The participant number is a numeric variable. You also have number of decimals you want to have for your variable, so you can enter, if you will choose 2 decimals, it will enter 1.00. So let's have a look how it looks. So if we want to enter participant number 1, here is what it shows when you have 2 decimal places. We can remove decimal places or put them to 0, and then if we'll go to the data view, we see that it's simply 1. Also, if you work, let's say, with the milliseconds, where you pretty much work with the decimal places, you can increase it to whatever number you need. Usually 3 or 4 is enough. You can label to say what does your participant variable actually means, and in here we can say that it's basically a participant number. You can assign values, but we'll talk about values and how to assign them when we'll get to the between participants variables, because values are very important for between participant variables. You can assign what values are missing values, the width of the column, and type of measurement. And then the last one will have roll input. Never ever touched it in my life. So let's move on. The next variable is the examination, and because it's within participant variable, we'll actually write out for every level of within participant variable. So we'll write traditional and open book. Yeah. So they are also both numeric. We can also remove decimal places from this variable because we know we don't have any decimals. We can give it labels as participants taking traditional closed book exam, but it's not a big deal for this simple data set. We also don't have any values for these two variables because they're within participants. It's very important to think of what is your dependent variable. In our case, the dependent variable is the examination score on traditional and open book exams, and the dependent variable for within participant variables or within participants factors are always recorded under the within participant factor. If you're using a between participants factor, then you need to have a separate variable for the dependent variable, so which is not the case for us. And the last one, last variable we have in our data set is gender. So gender, and it's will be numeric because we need to assign numbers to it. If you well, I better not confuse you, so I'll stop right there. Decimals, we don't really need them, and we know that in gender we have males and females, and that's where it's important to assign values. So let me show it again. If you'll go to the values and press on a square that appears in the gender row under the values column, it will give you a new option, value labels. Under the value, you will always ever write a number. You don't use letters or names in that when you assign values. Value is the number. So we can give 1, and let's say 1 will represent male. You add it. So now SPSS knows that number 1 actually corresponds to the male participants. Then we can give 2 to our females. So SPSS know 1 is the male, 2 is the female. We press OK, and here our 4 variables entered. Going back to the data view, is that where we enter our actual data. So we know we have 10 participants, so we can just enter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Oops, and there we go. 7, 8, 9, 10. And here we see that our number 10 participants correspond to 10 subjects in SPSS. Now we have examinations. We know that participant 1 scored 58 in traditional exam and 58 in open book exam. So traditional exam 58, open book exam 58. Now participant 2 scored 55 in a traditional exam and 65 in open book exam. So enter 55 and 65. If you have a Word document or Excel spreadsheet where you import your data from, you can pretty much select the data you want to import and simply copy paste it. So just double check you copy pasted everything correctly. Let's say participant 9 scored 65 in a traditional and 62 in open book. There we go, 65 and 62. The last variable we have to enter is gender. And we coded our gender variable because it's a categorical variable. We coded 1 as male, 2 as female. So if you ever forget how you coded your categorical variable, let's say if you code ethnicity, you may have 10 ethnic groups and you may not remember which number represents which group. You can always go to the variable view, click on your category, on your values, and see what are the values for what groups are. So we know that our first participant was male, so we give it value 1. Second participant was male, so we'd give it value 2. Third participant was a female, male, value 1. Third participant was a female, so we give it value 2. Fourth participant is male, again value 1. Then we have female, 2, 2, male, female, male, female. So now all the gender assigned to our participants. We can, if you correctly recoded your values, you can press on this button, number to a value label, and it will show you the labels for your values. So here we go. We entered a very simple data set into the SPSS from the Word document. Now you'll need to save your data. To save it, go to the file, save as, and you can choose how you want to save it. Let's say examination experiment raw data, and you can choose where you want to save it. So let's just save it to the desktop. Oops, so we choose desktop and save. This output window will appear by default every time you save your data file, every time you split your files, reorder variables, whatever you do, unless it has some important analysis or results of the analysis in there. There is no need of saving it, so no, we just close it. And there it is. Good luck with trying entering your data.